All right, guys. Hey, it's Jonathan Edwards here. Welcome to another video or an audio, depending on where you are. But listen, a disclaimer, as always, I work with aspiring athletes and their families. These are families who've got big athletic dreams and they're really go for it. My advice is geared towards them. So with that in mind, some of that advice may not rub you the right way if you are not as into it or committed. If you aren't willing to take 100% responsibility for your athletic experience, if you're going to blame coaches, blame the weather, blame something other than yourself, this probably isn't the advice for you. So if you're going to hang out, that's fine. Leave appropriate comments where necessary. But again, just a little disclaimer, this advice isn't for everybody. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Let's get started.
All right. So this is an interesting one. As you guys know, like I run mentalperformanceschool.com and if you have an athlete and your family and you're invested in wanting your athlete, I hope you'll invest in that. I try to make it one of the best resources out there. And I'm always adding to it too. So, I want, if you've got an athlete who's got big athletic dreams, I want you to check out Mental Performance School and invest in that. And I hope to really kind of help your athlete, because there's no other program on the planet that works like an athlete and a family that works with their athlete and the family. Right. So most people, like most parents, will send their athlete to a sports psychologist or a mental performance coach, whatever you want to call it, when their athlete's plateaued. Their athlete hasn't plateaued. They're frustrated because they're not getting results. So there's the plateau is superficial in my opinion. But the frustration is real. Okay. So one of the questions that comes up with a lot of my athletes is that should they relocate and work with another coach? Now, in some sports, that's not possible, right? So like in a sport like luge that I was part of, like you can't, there's not another coach. Sometimes within a program, there might be two coaches and you might like one versus the other. And that's okay. That's okay. But in sports like, tennis or gymnastics, or equestrian, you can just like up and leave and go to another country if you want to train. And so some people hear that and they're like, oh my God, who would make that investment? Well, people who are serious about being really good athletes. They do it all the time. And sometimes they do it for the right reasons, but sometimes they also do it, they get distracted and they do it for the wrong reasons. And so, I work with a lot of people in the tennis business, and this is very common. So a young figure skating is also another sport where this is common. So an athlete, starts competing and or starts in their sport, and their local coach helps get them to a certain point. And what I tell my athletes is that your coach is there to help you get to the next level. Okay, whatever that level is for you, by the way. Like it could, that doesn't always mean like, okay, you're going to be an Olympian. It just might mean like you're going from the JV to the varsity, or the junior national team to the senior national team, or the A team to the B team, the C team, like whatever. Okay. In equestrian, just as a fun little side note, there's an event called eventing. It's basically like cross country for a horse and rider. And the eventing events used to be incredibly long. They actually had to shorten them for the Olympics because of just like real estate. But in eventing, you can have a young rider who's like a really good rider, but they get a slow time because their horse is small or not very, not very strong. So what do? They invest in a bigger horse. And then now you get an athlete on a bigger horse. And now with a bigger horse, you get bigger problems. Right. And in eventing, there's this thing called spiraling, where a horse jumps over an obstacle, but gets hung up and basically does like a handstand. The horse does like a handstand and falls over and crushes the rider. And so every year people die in that sport because of, basically people going like, all right, if we just have a bigger, faster horse, we're going to win. Okay. And that same attitude trickles over into coaches, where people think like, oh, if I just had a different coach, I would be better. Sometimes your local coach is really good, and for whatever reason, they are not in the path from a business perspective to be to be that go-to flashy coach. Okay. And so I know a lot of coaches who fall in this category. Their mentality doesn't suit the program that has both players and payers. So for like a gymnastics facility, for instance, that has a competitive program, within that competitive program, there's going to be a handful of athletes that are really good and they're going to make it to the next level. And then that program will have everybody else. And even at the bottom of that pile of athletes, there'll be athletes that shouldn't be there, where the coaching is not for them, but they're there and they're paying, and that's keeping the lights on, it's keeping the coaches paid, things along those lines. So rightly or wrongly, what ends up happening is parents will start to they'll look and they'll see a club that has more kids that are more competitive. That doesn't necessarily mean that coach is better, because the coach you may have is fantastic, but for whatever reasons, they are staying small. And that's something to kind of understand. And that's a conversation. It's a tough conversation, but you can actually have it with your coach and go, listen, because I encourage all my athletes to have a relationship with their coaching staff, right? Like not like a love relationship, but to get to know your coach. And this is where sometimes parents miss the boat here, because parents who are in like a professional world, if they are like lawyers or if they're engineers and they're moving up and they're successful, there's a level of disagreeableness that helps them get there. Your coach may be technically very good and they can teach technical, they can teach tactical, they can teach physical, but personality wise, they may skew more on the agreeable side of things. And that may not be attractive to the parents because they want somebody's going to be a little bit more of a hard ass on their kid. But your coach, even though they can tell your kid all the things they need to be an Olympian, you may not like that. Or vice versa. That coach may be a bit of a hard ass. And the parents may not be as much of a hard ass. So they skew more on the agreeable side. The coach is more on the disagreeable side of the spectrum. The athlete in the middle, though, needs to learn that disagreeable side to be successful in their sport, yet that rubs the athlete the wrong way because mom and dad aren't like that, right? So this happens all the time. The coach comes off as considered like a hard ass or abusive or things along those lines, when in fact, all they are is they're just on the disagreeable side of the spectrum. And for the parent or the athlete who's on the agreeable side of the spectrum, that rubs them really, really the wrong way. Okay. Now that's great. It works. It may work to a point while that athlete has success, but when that athlete starts not having success, okay, then that divide on the agreeableness spectrum gets wider and causes more conflict. And that's weird and it's not cool. So one of the things that happens is that this may force a family to look for another coach. So that can go both ways. A coach can be looking for a more disagreeable coach that's going to push their athlete, right, and ask them to do more, be more, have more, and then put the athlete in an environment where there's better athletes that have a higher level of interest. I saw this with my own kids when they were young. Their personality was such that their personality meshed with the kids that were up a tier, like the tier 1, 2 kids. My kids got along with them, but my kids didn't have the technical ability like those kids had, right? So what ends up happening? Well, your kid ends up being put with a lower tier, but the population of kids is wrong for them, right? So the mentality of those tier 4 or 5 kids is they're a bit of a goofball, right? And this is where sometimes when you put kids together of like mind and not like skill, you have more success. And I think what ends up happening in a lot of sports like soccer and, football and things along those lines is you're going to have kids that may not be up to speed technically yet, but their mentality is that of a world-class athlete. And so what we miss is that we miss that disconnect. So let's say you have an athlete who is very agreeable and very talented, but now you put them into a program with kids who are like really competitive and as talented. Well, now your athlete has to start learning the skills to manage that environment. Okay. The coaches, just to give you a little background here, the smaller the sport, usually the more sense of politicalness there is. I had a strength and conditioning coach, Charles Staley, taught me that. He worked with athletes who were in USA weightlifting. Okay. And weightlifting in the United States, especially 15 years ago, was just tiny. It's gotten better with CrossFit. There's actually been more kids, more athletes. And so it's really kind of drawn that. But you take an athlete who is like agreeable and conscientious and throw them in a situation where they have to be like pretty disagreeable and really stick up for themselves. They don't have that skill, right? And that skill is not necessarily a athletic skill. It's a negotiating life skill. And I didn't learn that until way late in my life, right? So, but nobody ever talks about this. So you may have a very good coach locally, and maybe that coach is a hard ass on your athlete. And you're looking at this other program, this other club, and you're going like, oh, I've heard really good things about that coach. But that coach may be building a business, right? They're building a business of athletes. And so then they have to take on a different attitude, a different approach with your athlete. They've got to be more like, oh, hey, Mrs. Jones, yo, yes, we'd love to have your athlete. Oh, they'd be a fantastic fit. They don't give a shit. They really don't, right? That coach may be equally talented, or maybe less talented than the coach that you have, but the parents aren't willing to stick with that coach because of a personality difference that not only is the athlete uncomfortable with, but the parents are uncomfortable with. Okay. And right now we are in this total, world of hyper focus on being offended and hypersensitivity. And really like it's, and you can argue that all day long. You say like, oh no, coaches now are horrible and they're abusive, whatever. No. Coaches have probably been like that for a really long time. And I can attest for that in my own experience, but the idea is that as a family and as an athlete, you are navigating the personalities around your sport. So how do you do that? So as a family, mom, dad, athlete, maybe some brothers and sisters there, the idea is that we are developing an athlete who is physically, technically, and tactically capable to survive their sport, right? At the highest level, right? So physical, technical, tactical abilities, right? That comes first. And I have that at athletespecific.com. If you want to learn more about that, if you go check out athletespecific.com and just click on the link in the upper corner there and you can download. I've got a ton of free resources, managing negative thoughts. If you click on that, you will, there's a ton of resources there, okay, to check out. Okay. So automatic negative thoughts. There's also, I've got resources on the 3 key abilities. So what are you trying to do? You're trying to prepare your athlete to survive in that environment. Now, this is a skill. If you go to the homepage at athletespecific.com and hit the get a free course button, you can get my athletic 3 key abilities. And I got one for athletes and I got one for parents. You can check that out there. Okay. See my smiling face. Hi. All right. So with that, the idea is that you have to decide who is going to help your athlete develop those abilities efficiently. All right. And so I didn't say fast. I didn't say quickly. I didn't say make them super strong or what. I just said like efficiently. Okay. So does your club, does your coach right now, the one you're with, have those resources? Right. Because one of the things that we talk about in sport a lot is volume. And so in luge, a sport like luge, it's run volume. In same thing goes with like racing cars or riding horses. Like it's just volume, right? Lifting weights, there's always a volume number. How much time, and in that time, how much load have you had? And so you can track all that, right? So can your current coach give you that training load? Okay. And in their opinion, are they on track? Like, is your athlete on track? because sometimes a program may ask your athlete to play up. Okay. So they can play up a level. So let's say they're a young athlete, they're playing with older athletes, or and the coaching staff thinks that your athlete needs to be around that that demand. Okay, so I work with a lot of athletes in team sports, and so this happens a lot. So your athlete at a young age is above average for their age. So one of the best ways to do that, to improve that, is like we're going to take that younger athlete and put them around older athletes. Okay, to basically give them a better demand. So in soccer a lot, you have kids, they're called call-ups, right? So they're a tier 3 athlete, and they get called up to play with a tier 1 team. So that's usually your best athlete off of that tier 3 team gets to go play up. Okay, you can have kids that are JV athletes, but they can go play with a varsity. Okay, in more kind of not esoteric, I don't know if that's the right word, but in other sports like gymnastics or whatnot, you might have a young athlete who gets asked to go train with the older team. So when I was on the junior national team in luge and was competing with Mark Romet, we raced in this is 1991, we raced in the World Championships in Winterberg, and we had a really good result. We finished 4th, and I remember Lynn Hancock that night said, "Hey, how would you guys like to go to Calgary for the World Championships with a senior national team?" And we were like, "Hell yeah, let's do it." And I mean, that was awesome, right? And it was good. And we were just in that mode of just, still competing. And it was more volume, right? We got a chance to go race and compete in an event that wasn't too far over our head. It was just going to be great experience. Okay. So there's a difference there if you understand that. So there's, in that experience, there was no additional physical load on us other than going to go spend some more time competing, like sliding, like, and taking runs in a big environment. And I still remember flying from Germany to Calgary, and the first thing we did when we arrived in Calgary, and we were so excited for this, was we got to have dinner at the hotel restaurant. Like, it was on the team. And I remember having a steak sandwich, and it was just like the best thing. It was awesome. I love steak sandwiches still, right? Because of that moment, like, it's just seared into my brain. But that event for us wasn't going to be any more load on us. Now, the one thing though, we were still high school kids. We had homework to do. We had things like that. So we just put all that aside to compete and just have that moment. It's different than like if we were like a rugby player or a football player, and you're like super good technically, and you get called up to all of a sudden now and you're going up against bigger, faster kids, and you might risk an injury. Okay. So you have to think about that load in terms of like, all right, am I going to go, like I see this happen with hockey kids all the time. They get called up to a new team, and they get, especially like in junior A hockey, there's like, or especially in lacrosse too, like there's a 5-year spread of athlete. There's a 17-year-old kid going up against a 21-year-old kid. That's a massive physical jump. So you have to weigh that risk in terms of is it good to go train with that new program and that new coach who's involved in that program. And so this is where I warn my parents, like, if you're in a sport where the coach is getting compensated, like, hockey, soccer, it's like a travel program or things along those lines, you've got to worry about the ulterior motives of the coach, right? But sometimes, even with that, being aware of that, the coach's motives may be completely pure, but they may look weird. So you have to decide that. If your athlete's personality, though, is seeking to be around more competitive people. Now, I notice I didn't say like better people, because I'll be honest, like, there's athletes who are completely prodigious. They are not prodigious, but they're fantastic athletes. They're really good performers, yet they're asshole. Like, they're just, I can't give it a different word. Or they have got drug problems or drinking problems, or, I'll be honest, like, although I won't even go there. But, especially for like my Yeah, it's a big. I won't get into that conversation right now. If your athlete they have a more adult mentality for their age. Okay, if they're psychologically more mature, moving up a level, being with a different coach, demanding more is a good choice. If your athlete though is a bit of a baby, and I say that respectfully, and some parents like think of their kids as like always a baby. Like I've told this story before. I had a lacrosse player who was a Division I recruit. Like this kid got a half scholarship to Division I school, and his mom was like, "How does anybody want to recruit my kid? He still doesn't pick up his laundry off the floor." That's your own deal. Like you have to look at yourself and as a parent and go like, am I seeing my athlete like? Because you know this, like as a parent, you know your kid. But also sometimes as a parent, you don't want your kid to grow up. You don't want them to leave the house. You don't want them to have an experience that they really deserve because as a mom or as a dad, you're still trying to hold them close. Right. And so that's fine, but you just got to be aware, like, what am I doing here? You know, like I had a parent recently who I realized was they didn't want their kid to get their driver's license because they didn't want them to drive away. And that's a stake in the heart moment, right? That's a pull on the heartstrings moment. But only as a parent, you know that. So if your athlete gets recruited, so to speak, like a coach from another program or another club, or like the varsity coach to the JV or the senior team to the junior team, that the idea there is like, you've got to just ask really good questions of the coach and go like, okay, why are we doing this? Like, how does this serve my athlete in their long-term athlete development? And that's a legitimate question to ask your coach. Just say, okay, how does going to your team, your club, your program serve my athlete in their long-term athlete development? And one thing, just a little caveat here, if your athlete is like if they're like a collegiate athlete in a team sport, some people treat that Division I program as the end. But I'm here to tell you that that's not true. So in sports like football, for example, that football player who's going D1, they're trying to get to the NFL. So the question is, coach, how does my athlete going to your program serve that goal? Okay. So for any of my athletes that are on Olympic tracks, like skiing, luge, skating, like whatever, the idea is like, okay, how is going to your program fit into that mode? And then you go to your current coach and you go like, okay, how do you feel? Like, so, I work with a lot of tennis kids, and tennis kids, they're notorious for wanting to train at some big facility with some big name coach, whereas that local coach they have is actually a better coach. They're going to help them. And to be honest, that coach is desperate to help to develop your athlete and reap that reward for them. Like, as a coach, like, a lot of times coaches like lose athletes to other programs. And then the parents are like, oh my God, that's the same thing that other coach was telling us the whole time. And then your coach is probably home now without you as an athlete going like, yeah, I told you so. Now, do you go back to the coach? Well, maybe. But the thing is that, the ultimate question is like, how does this move fit into the development of my athlete? Is the competition appropriate? Because one thing that every athlete needs to have is like that Goldilocks theory of competition, right? You want to have some competition that's too hot, right? And you lose. You want to have competition that's too cold, where you just breeze through it. And then you want to have competition that's just right. And sometimes when you're the athlete at the top of the food chain in your program, most of what you're finding is that the competition is too cold. It's not pushing you enough. And it's a very special athlete that can develop all the habits. And I wrote about this in my book, but it's a rare athlete that can develop all of those habits and develop all those habits in a program that doesn't give them enough competition. Okay. So being around better athletes that have better results, but also looking beyond even those athletes. Like, if you're in an international sport, you want to be looking at athletes who are the best in the world, right? So like, I love watching swimming at the Olympics because it's kind of neat is you get all these athletes from all these different countries, right? They're all competing under their country, under their flag, but they all go to like, Stanford or, Texas Tech or like whatever. So they've seen each other collegiately. And what's kind of cool in a timed event is that you're looking at the time, like the best time in the world this year is this, and I'm here. And so that takes your eye off of the swimmer to your right or your left, right? And so that's really cool. But in some sports, you don't really have that very easily. But you always want to be training for the athlete who's not with you all the time, right? You don't want to be the cream of the crop. You don't want to be the top of the bottom of the barrel. You want to be a good athlete in a good program. And you may be an athlete in a program where, okay, so you win all this stuff in your club, you train locally, you win all this stuff locally, but then you go to like a national event, and that's where you get a chance to compete against that other athlete in a different part of the country, right? That kid from Florida, right? And you're from Oregon, right? And so now you're getting a chance to compete, but you're going to go back home to your family and train with your coach and do whatever. But you may find you get to a point where you're like, okay, I've kind of plateaued. I'm not getting I've got bigger fish to fry here. Like, what do I do? So I want to wrap this up by saying sometimes the coach you currently have is the best option, depending on your sport, depending where you are, depending on the resources that you have. It's the best option. And you can do more with that coach, especially if you sit down with that coach and you get on the same page and you go, all right, what are we trying to do here? And how are we going to do it? Because when you have that understanding as a parent and as an athlete, that this is the plan, and that plan keeps reaping results, fantastic. You don't need to go anywhere. You don't have to seek out like the best facility, like the whiz bang facility that's got like the fresh towels and the good food and all that sort of stuff. You might not need that, but depending on your personality as a family, that may be a better choice. All right. What I've noticed, and there's no science behind this, but what I've noticed is that athletes and families who skew agreeable in the personality in the big five, they have difficulty with coaches who are disagreeable. But they will seek out a coach in a program who is more disagreeable to push their athlete. But then their athlete, because they're not necessarily that same mentality, that may not work very well for them. Coach may think they're not working hard enough. Athlete might think the coach is a jerk. Doesn't work out. Parents and athletes who skew more on the disagreeable side, who have a local coach who is more a nice guy, that nice guy who is agreeable may be technically the smartest thing in the book. You may have like a bookshelf like mine, just like all the technical parts of your sport, know everything. And then what ends up happening is that they don't like that local coach anymore. They don't think it's enough, even though he is like this. He might be a savant, right, in your sport. That's really important to kind of underwear. So then what ends up happening is that they seek other disagreeable coaches that are going to push their athlete and be a little bit more hard-nosed and make them work harder. So now you go to that coach, but now you got a program of athletes around that coach. And now that coach and that athlete, maybe they're away from home. They don't like anybody. They've got this like Olympic dream or this national dream. But they have no friends. And now it's like, we moved here for that coach, but now all the athletes, there's just not that personality mesh there. But again, like from an athlete perspective, that can only get you so far, right? You've got to make those, if an athlete is more introverted and they're happy by themselves, they might do okay, right? But if they're extroverted and they want to have friends and they want to, maybe there's some cute guy or some cute girl, like it's like, wait a second, there's all these other tensions around this. You got to weigh that too, right? Or if you're billeting, if your athlete's like leaving, we're home and they're billeting someplace and the billet's a bad deal, like you just got to think of all that stuff. Okay. So to wrap up, have conversations with your coach locally. What's the plan? What are we doing? How are we going to get there? All right. if there's this other bright and shiny object out there, it might be perfect. But the question is like, how does this fit into the long-term athlete development of my athlete? What are we going to get from this that we're not getting currently? What are we losing that we currently enjoy? Is that going to serve us? What's the overall personality of you as the coach? Those you got to add, and there's like a laundry list of questions, right? And you've got to ask those questions. Okay. So.
All right, guys. Hey, it's Jonathan. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And do me a favor, hit the subscribe button if you would. Hit the thumbs up. That would be huge. And also, when you hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon. That way you get notified of future episodes. And after you've done all that, check out mentalperformanceschool.com. The link will be in the descriptions below. And it is my program that I created for aspiring athletes and their parents and their families. So it's the only program of its kind. You see a lot of people reach out to a guy like me when their athlete's broken and they feel like their athlete's plateaued and frustrated. And the truth is that you got to put in the work way before that. And mentalperformanceschool.com is that program to help you avoid those pitfalls before they become an issue. Mental health is a real hot topic now in the world of sports, but it doesn't have to be. And the reason it is a hot topic is because a lot of athletes are unprepared. And mentalperformanceschool.com is a way to prevent that. And like I said, it's the only program of its kind. So check it out. I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.